The first time he walked into the Karras Field Auditorium, the room smelled like oiled metal and dried antiseptic. The scent clung to the benches and the training mats, to the racks of composite plating that lined one wall like trophies. Above the instructor dais hung a storm map of the planet, bright red swaths pulsing across the northern latitudes, Thorn season trajectories, wind vectors, predicted bloom density. The alien cadets sitting in stepped rows looked up when he entered, and the silence that followed was not the respectful kind. It was the pause before laughter. He wore the standard cadet undersuit, thin, flexible, and meant to be paired with an exoshell on worlds that tried to kill the careless. On Karras, the exoshells were stacked behind the barrier line, tagged with names and species codes. Most cadets had already claimed a set: rigid forearm guards, thigh plates, neck collars, face shields that sealed with a hiss. When he looked at the rack, he saw his own code. His hook was empty. The senior instructor, a tall female with a pale crest and a voice that carried without effort, watched him take that in. She let him stand there just long enough for the message to settle into his ribs. "Cadet Ryan," she said. She did not pronounce it quite right, the way most of them did, flattening the vowel and dragging the ending as if it were something unpleasant stuck to her tongue. "Step forward." He walked to the center line on the mat. The auditorium lights glinted off the smooth armor of the cadets nearest the aisle. He could hear the faint tick of their breathing valves, the soft clicks of claws against polymer. A few of them leaned forward to see if he would flinch. "Your assignment is the Thorn season endurance route," the instructor continued, indicating the storm map. 5 days, no extraction, no external resupply, standard toolkit, standard rations. Any injury you sustain will be treated only with what you carry or what you source locally. Her gaze slid to the empty hook again. "You will not be issued an exoshell." A ripple went through the benches. A male cadet in the third row, broad-shouldered and plated in glossy black, made a sound that was almost a cough and almost a laugh. Another female cadet beside him angled her head, crest frills fluttering in amusement. The room warmed with quiet cruelty. Ryan kept his face still. He had trained himself into that expression in earlier modules, back when human reflexes had been the joke of the week, and he had learned that the punchline always landed harder if he reacted. His fingers curled once, then relaxed. He looked at the instructor and waited. The instructor lifted a data slate. "Your medical profile indicates high susceptibility to dermal laceration and puncture. Epidermal thickness below academy average. Protective keratin structures absent. External dermal plating absent." She paused. "In other words, soft skin." That was when the laughter finally got permission to exist. It was not roaring. It did not need to be. It came in clipped bursts, in the rasp of mandibles, in the metallic chatter of throat plates. It was the sound of predators amused by prey that had wandered into the open. A male cadet called from the back, his voice filtered through a respirator. "Is the trial meant to be educational or entertaining, Instructor Vasca?" More clicks, more fluttering crests. Someone added, "Maybe the human is meant to fertilize the thorns." The instructor did not smile, but her eyes reflected the same cold humor. "The Academy does not waste assets," she said. "Cadet Ryan will complete the route or be recovered as an example." Ryan breathed in slowly. The air tasted like disinfectant and hot circuitry. He forced himself to process the words as information instead of insult. No exoshell meant he would be exposed to Karras the way the planet wanted to touch him, with barbed vegetation, razor-edged seed pods, and wind that drove spines through fabric as if it were paper. The storm map pulsed again, red bands crawling forward like living veins. He had read the environmental brief twice, then once more the morning of deployment. Thorn season did not mean a few prickly shrubs. Thorn season meant an ecosystem that weaponized reproduction. Plants burst into bloom and dropped spines that hooked and climbed and tore. When the hot winds came, entire fields lifted into the air, thorn clusters spinning like blades. The report called it Aerodynamic dispersal. The casualty lists from earlier expeditions called it something else. Ryan looked across the benches at the cadets who had already put on their armor. Some species had grown plates naturally, ridged shielding along forearms and shoulders. Others had chitin that turned cuts into shallow scratches. Even the smaller cadets had protective membranes that tightened under stress. Karis had never been fair, but the Academy had decided to make it unfair on purpose. A female cadet in front row, slender and pale, leaned toward her neighbor and said something softly. Ryan caught the words anyway. "Look at his hands," she whispered. "Bare. Like larval skin?" The neighbor, another female, made an appreciative sound. "He will come back ribboned." Ryan kept his eyes on the instructor, but he could feel the heat on his neck. Not shame, anger, contained and compressed. Anger had always been the easiest thing to light inside him. Control was harder. He had learned to control it because he had to, because rage in a hostile room was a gift wrapped for someone else to open. Instructor Vasca tapped the data slate. "Cadet Ryan, state your understanding of the parameters." He straightened. 5 days on the endurance route. No extraction, no resupply. Standard kit and rations. Self-treatment only with carried supplies or local materials. Objective is completion of the route. "And your armor status?" "No issued exoshell," he said. He did not let his voice tilt upward into a question. "And your assessment of the risk?" That was a trap. If he downplayed it, he would sound ignorant. If he admitted fear, he would sound weak. He chose the third option, accuracy. "The risk is high," he said. "Thorn season increases laceration probability, puncture probability, infection probability. Mobility will be reduced by environmental entanglement. Shelter construction is likely complicated by barbed growth." A few cadets quieted, listening despite themselves. He could sense the shift. Mockery loved a simple target. Mockery struggled with someone who spoke as if he belonged in the room. Instructor Vasca's crest angled. "You have studied," she said, as if she had hoped he had not. "Study does not stop thorns." "No," he answered, "but it tells him where the thorns come from." He caught himself immediately. He had slipped into a generic phrasing, the habit of old briefings, the easy grammar of "one does this." He corrected before anyone could twist it into confusion. "It tells me where the thorns come from." A fresh burst of laughter flared, trying to smother the moment. The male in glossy black armor raised one clawed hand. "Maybe the human will negotiate with the plants." Ryan turned his head toward the voice. The cadet's armor was expensive, reinforced at the joints, with a visor that folded down in overlapping segments. The cadet had never looked genuinely afraid of anything in the academy. He looked amused now, comfortable in his certainty. Ryan held the gaze, then looked away without hurrying. He refused to play the game on the cadet's terms. He returned his attention to the instructor. Instructor Vasca gestured toward the equipment tables. "Collect your kit." "Departure in 1 hour." She stepped down from the dais, moving with the calm of someone who had seen enough injuries to become bored by them. As she passed him, she lowered her voice so only he could hear. "The Academy records show humans complain," she said. "Humans blister, humans bleed. If you fail, Cadet Ryan, you will not fail alone. You will fail as your species does." The words were precise, designed to sting deeper than anything shouted from a bench. He felt them land under his ribs, heavy and deliberate. He answered in the same low tone. "If he bleeds," he said carefully, then corrected himself again with a tight inhale. "If I bleed, I will not blame my skin. I will blame my plan." Instructor Vasca's eyes narrowed. For a moment, something like interest flickered there. Then it vanished behind professional indifference. She continued walking, leaving him with the auditorium's noise and the storm map's pulse. Ryan went to the equipment table. The standard kit waited in a sealed case: a cutting tool, a compact coil of line, a fire start module, a collapsible water membrane, a basic med patch pack, and a field slate with route markers. The rations were dense blocks wrapped in foil. The med pack was what caught his attention. It contained sealant spray, antimicrobial swabs, and 2 narrow rolls of adhesive wrap. Useful. Not enough. Not even close. He touched the med pack as if his fingers could will extra supplies into existence. He imagined thorn tips driven under nails, hooks caught in muscle, spines embedded too deep to pull without tearing. He pushed the images away and focused on what he could control: preparation, observation, improvisation. Around him, armored cadets collected their own gear with easy confidence. A male cadet adjusted a shoulder plate and tested its latch. A female cadet tightened a neck seal and laughed as if the planet outside was a stage built for her entertainment. Their exoshells made them loud, clacks and clicks, the scrape of rigid plates. Ryan's undersuit made him almost silent. The difference felt like standing naked in a room of dressed people. A small female cadet approached, her armor tinted matte green. She stopped at a polite distance, eyes studying him with the cautious curiosity of someone who had not decided whether to join the jokes. "Human," she said. Her voice was softer than the others, less sharpened for sport. "Is it true your skin tears from simple contact?" Ryan looked at her crest pattern, at the faint scars on her exposed jawline where her own species' plates met softer tissue. He chose honesty again. "It tears if he is careless," he began, then stopped himself before the wrong word left his mouth again. He had to stay disciplined. "It tears if I am careless," he corrected. "It does not tear if I respect what cuts." The female cadet's eyes shifted to his hands. "You will be forced to respect everything," she said. "Yes," he replied. "That is the point." She hesitated, then gave a short nod and walked away, armor whispering as it moved. Her question lingered with him longer than the laughter did. It reminded him that not every gaze in the auditorium was purely cruel. Some were simply waiting to see what he would become. He carried his sealed kit case to his assigned prep bay. The bay walls were utilitarian, scuffed from years of anxious hands. A mirror panel reflected his face back at him. Human, unarmored, eyes too tired for how young the file said he was. He set the case down and opened it, laying each piece out in a line. He checked the cutting tool's edge. He tested the fire start. He scanned the route markers on the slate, a winding path through thorn flats, a ravine known for wind funnels, a patch of scrub forest labeled with a warning symbol. The final marker sat on higher ground, where thorn season winds reportedly weakened. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to his own breathing. He could still hear the auditorium, the way the word soft had been spoken like a verdict. Soft, weak, unfit. He thought of Earth's forests, of hiking through brambles as a kid and learning the hard way that pain was a teacher. He thought of how humans survived not because he was armored, but because he adapted faster than the environment could finish the job. He was not immune to thorns. He was not a miracle. He was a body with limits and a mind that refused to be reduced to a punchline. When the departure alarm chimed through the corridor, he stood and rolled his shoulders. He wrapped the adhesive bandage around his left forearm once, not to protect it, too thin for that, but to remind himself that he could build layers, even if the academy would not hand them to him, layer by layer, plan by plan. Outside the prep bay, cadets assembled in a line, armor gleaming under the bay lights. Instructor Vasca waited at the airlock, hands clasped behind her back, expression unreadable. Beyond the thick viewing port, Karis waited in washed-out sunlight, the horizon hazy with dust and pollen. Even from here, Ryan could see the first thorn blooms dotting the flats like dark freckles on pale ground. A male cadet in glossy black armor stepped closer as Ryan joined the line. "Try not to scream," he murmured, voice low enough to pretend it was private, loud enough to be heard. "Soft skin makes noise when it opens." Ryan looked at the cadet's visor and imagined the face behind it. Confident, protected, ignorant of what protection cost when it failed. Ryan answered without raising his voice. "I will be too busy walking," he said. The male cadet snorted and turned away. A few nearby cadets shifted, disappointed that the exchange had not become a spectacle. Ryan did not give them more. He kept his eyes forward. He felt his heartbeat steady itself into a rhythm he could use. Instructor Vasca keyed the airlock. "Final checks," she called. "Seal integrity. Hydration membranes filled. Root slates synchronized." Cadets ran quick diagnostics, their armor flashing status lights. Ryan had no armor lights. He checked his water membrane, tightened his undersuit sleeves, and secured his kit case to his pack frame. He ran his fingers over the med pack again and memorized where each item sat. He would not have the luxury of searching later with shaking hands. The airlock door hissed. Heat rolled in, dry and sharp. The scent was different than the auditorium's antiseptic. Sun-baked resin, mineral dust, something faintly sweet that made the back of his throat itch. Thorn pollen, he realized. Already in the air, already looking for skin. Instructor Vasca watched him as he stepped toward the threshold. Her gaze lingered on his bare hands, on his unprotected neck. She looked as if she expected him to hesitate. Ryan did not hesitate. He crossed the threshold and felt the planet's wind touch his face, gentle for now, like a hand testing a blade. Behind him, the armored cadets followed with the ease of people who believed the universe owed them fairness. In front of him, the flats stretched into shimmer and shadow, and the first thorn clusters swayed as if they were breathing. Ryan adjusted his pack and began walking, not fast, not dramatic, but steady. Soft skin, he thought, was a fact. Survival would be the answer. The flats thinned into broken ground within the first hour, and the thorns changed character. Here they did not lie in patient clusters waiting for wind. Here they grew aggressive and deliberate, curling upward from the soil in hooked spirals, each spine barbed backward so that retreat cost more than advance. Ryan slowed his pace and let the others pass him. Armor scraped and clicked as cadets forced paths forward, snapping smaller growth and trampling brittle stems. The sound carried far. Ryan moved quietly, stepping where the ground had already hardened under old root mats, letting his weight settle before committing. Pain announced itself early, a sharp kiss against his calf when a low thorn reached through fabric and drew blood. He stopped immediately. He refused the instinct to curse and continue. He crouched, examined the puncture, cleaned it with a measured breath, and sealed it. The act cost him minutes, but it bought him something more valuable than speed. It taught him how fast the skin closed when treated quickly, how the fabric wicked blood, how the thorn's resin reacted with the sealant. The planet was already giving instructions. He listened. By mid-morning, the scrub forest rose ahead, thin-trunked and pale, bark layered in overlapping sheets like scales frozen in mid-shed. Wind moved through the branches with a low whisper that raised the fine hairs on his arms. He stopped again, not from pain this time, but from curiosity. The trees were scarred. Deep grooves scored the lower trunks where something large had passed repeatedly. The grooves were not bite marks. They were polished smooth. Ryan knelt and pressed his fingers against the bark. The outer layer came away easily, lifting in broad, flexible plates. Underneath, a denser layer resisted, fibrous and tough. He peeled a section free and tested its give. It bent without cracking, edges feathering rather than splintering. When he scraped it against a thorn, the spine slid off instead of biting. He smiled, small and private. He worked carefully, stripping bark only from one side of each tree, never circling a trunk. He remembered old forestry guidelines from home, lessons about how trees died when ringed. He did not know if the same rules applied here, but he assumed life wanted symmetry preserved. He bound the bark plates together with twisted fiber drawn from fallen vines, layering them like shingles. The first piece went over his forearm. It sat awkwardly, But when he adjusted the tension, the bark settled into place as if it had been waiting for an arm-shaped excuse. The next hour vanished into work. He shaped a crude mantle for his shoulders, a collar that flared outward to catch incoming spines, plates for his thighs that overlapped to allow movement. Each piece added weight, but it was a familiar weight, honest and earned. The armor did not make him invincible. It made him deliberate. A rustle deeper in the scrub froze him mid-knot. He stilled and listened. Something moved with purpose, not with wind. He eased behind a trunk and watched. A quadruped emerged, lean and low, hide already traced with scars. Thorns clung to its flank like ornaments, embedded and ignored. The creature paused and rubbed its side against a trunk, grinding spines loose. Resin smeared across its hide, dark and glossy. Ryan watched the animal complete the ritual and move on, unconcerned with witnesses. He approached the trunk once the scrub fell quiet again. Resin pooled in the grooves, thick and fragrant. He touched it with a fingertip. The substance was warm, sticky, and carried a sharp scent that made his eyes water. When he smeared a thin layer across a shallow scratch on his wrist, the sting faded quickly, replaced by a cooling numbness. The resin darkened as it dried, sealing the skin and stiffening slightly. He laughed under his breath, a sound lost to the wind. The planet was generous to anyone willing to observe. He collected resin in a folded bark cup and crushed leaves from a low shrub with a bitter smell. He mixed the paste until it turned slick and amber, then rubbed it over exposed skin, careful around joints. The salve left a sheen that caught the light, but it also filled the air with a scent sharp enough to mask blood. He suspected that mattered. When he rose and resumed walking, thorns that brushed him slid instead of biting. Some still found purchase, but fewer, and when they did, the damage was shallow. He adjusted his route to stay within the scrub longer, even when the slate suggested a straighter path across open flats. The trees offered materials, shade, and information. The flats offered nothing but speed and pain. By afternoon, the wind shifted. It came in gusts that carried fine debris, tapping against his bark plates like rain. He heard shouts ahead, sharp with frustration. He approached cautiously and found a female cadet crouched near a fallen log, armor scraped and bent at the knee joint. A thorn cluster had wedged itself into the mechanism, locking the plate at an angle that made movement painful. She saw him and stiffened, one clawed hand moving reflexively toward a sidearm she was not permitted to use. Her eyes flicked to his bark armor and the resin-darkened skin between plates. "What did you do?" she asked. "I listened," he answered. He knelt without waiting for permission and examined the joint. The thorns were hooked deep. Pulling them free would tear cables and flesh together. "She is behind schedule," she said, voice tight. The others moved on. He glanced at the storm haze thickening on the horizon. "Speed will not help her," he said, then corrected himself immediately. "Speed will not help you." She hesitated, then inclined her head in reluctant consent. He heated a flat stone with his fire start, slow and controlled, and pressed it near the joint. The resin binding the thorns softened. He eased the cluster free, one spine at a time, sealing small tears as he went with his salve. The work took long minutes. He felt the wind rising, carrying the first true warning hiss of thorn season. When he finished, she flexed the joint carefully. The plate moved. She exhaled, a sound half relief and half disbelief. "Why help?" she asked. He shrugged, the bark plates creaking softly. "A slower path taken intact is still a path." She studied him, eyes lingering on the improvised armor. "Soft skin," she said, not as an insult this time, but as an assessment. "Hard choices." He met her gaze. "Adaptation," he said. She nodded once and rose, limping but mobile. She did not follow him when he turned back toward the scrub. She chose her own route, but the laughter that usually followed his presence was absent. As evening fell, the thorns bloomed. The air filled with motion, seed pods lifting and spinning, edges catching the dying light. Bark plates took the brunt, spines skittering away in showers. Some struck exposed areas, but the oil-slick skin resisted tearing. He kept moving, maintaining the armor as damage appeared, replacing cracked plates, reapplying salve. Pain was constant, but it was measured now, familiar enough to manage. When night came, he found shelter beneath a dense overhang of roots, bark plates stacked outward to form a crude barricade. He slept in fragments, waking often to resecure a knot or brush away creeping growth. The forest whispered around him, alive and dangerous, but no longer hostile without reason. By dawn, his armor bore the marks of 100 impacts. His skin bore fewer. He stood, adjusted the weight on his shoulders, and stepped back into the Thorn wind with a plan shaped by bark, resin, and respect. The wind found him before the sun fully cleared the horizon. It arrived low and fast, scraping across the ground and climbing his legs like an animal testing for weakness. Thorn clusters lifted in its wake, spinning end over end, striking bark and stone with dry, cracking impacts. Ryan tightened the last fiber knot at his shoulder and stepped forward, angling his body so the layered plates met the gusts instead of his joints. The armor absorbed the first wave with a series of dull knocks. Pain followed, muted and distributed, no single strike sharp enough to break his focus. The root marker on his slate pulsed weakly through the haze. He ignored the straight line it suggested and cut diagonally toward a shallow ravine where the ground dipped and the wind fractured against uneven walls. Movement there required care. The ravine was seeded with low thorns that curved inward like jaws, designed to trap whatever stumbled. He advanced sideways, testing each step, using his cutting tool only when withdrawal would cost more skin than advance. Midday darkened without warning. Clouds thickened into a bruised ceiling, and the thorn season escalated from constant to violent. Seed pods burst open in the air, releasing fine spines that hissed as they struck. Bark plates shuddered under the assault. Several cracked and split, edges feathering outward. Ryan stopped behind a stone outcrop and replaced the damaged pieces with practiced efficiency, hands moving even as the wind tugged at him. Resin sealed the bindings. Oil slicked exposed seams. The ritual steadied him. Work had a rhythm that fear could not disrupt. A scream cut through the noise, sharp and panicked. Ryan froze, listening. The sound came again, closer than he liked, breaking off into a choking gasp. He followed it along the ravine, keeping low. He found a male cadet pinned against a rock face, exoshell scored and dented, visor fractured. Thorns had lodged in the armor's vents, driving deeper with every struggling movement. Blood seeped from gaps the plates were never meant to expose. The cadet saw him and flailed harder. "Get them off!" he shouted. "Get them off me!" Ryan raised a hand. "Stop moving," he said. "The hooks are set." The cadet did not stop. Panic stripped discipline away. Another thorn tore free and embedded in the cadet's thigh. The scream turned raw. Ryan moved in anyway. He braced his barked shoulder against the wind and shielded the cadet with his body, plates ringing as spines struck. He worked fast, heating resin with friction and pressure, softening the hardened grips that locked thorns in place. One by one, he eased them out, sealing wounds immediately. His hands shook from exertion, not fear. The cadet sagged when the pressure eased, breaths coming in ragged pulls. "Why?" he managed, voice thick. "Why help me?" Ryan did not look up from the last binding. "Because you are alive," he said. He freed the cadet completely, but the damage was done. The exoshell's joint mechanisms were fouled beyond field repair. Movement would be slow and painful. The cadet tried to stand and failed, weight shifting wrong as a knee locked. Ryan met his eyes. "Shelter is north under the ledge," he said, pointing. "The wind breaks there. Stay low. Move when the gusts drop." "And you?" the cadet asked. "I will keep moving," Ryan said. The cadet swallowed. The mockery that had once lived comfortably on his tongue had no place to stand now. He nodded once and crawled toward the indicated shelter, armor scraping, breath steadying with purpose. The storm worsened. Thorns no longer came only from one direction. They rebounded off stone and ground, ricocheting unpredictably. Ryan shifted his route again, abandoning the ravine when it turned into a funnel. He climbed, muscles burning, fingers numb under resin-stiffened skin. Each ascent risked a slip that would cost flesh. He chose holds wrapped in bark plates, sacrificing armor to preserve muscle. Plates could be replaced. Tendons could not. At the ridge, the wind howled like a living thing denied its prey. Ryan crouched and let it pass over him, counting breaths. His armor shuddered, but it held. The oil salve darkened as dust and pollen adhered, forming a grimy shell that further dulled impacts. He reapplied it methodically, refusing haste. He crested the ridge at dusk. Below, the terrain changed again. The scrub thinned into scattered growth, and the ground glistened with shallow pools formed by rare condensation. The air smelled sharper here, metallic. Thorn density decreased, but the spines that remained were larger, heavier, thrown by gusts, with enough force to shatter bark outright. Ryan altered his armor, reinforcing the chest and face, sacrificing leg coverage to keep mobility. He advanced in short bursts between gusts, timing movement with the planet's breath. When a spine punched through a plate and lodged near his ribs, he stopped, removed it cleanly, sealed the wound, and replaced the plate without comment. Pain flared and subsided into background noise. Night fell fully, and with it came cold. The oil stiffened. Resin hardened. Ryan flexed continuously to keep joints moving. He found another shelter, shallow and imperfect, and spent the dark hours maintaining what he had built. His hands worked by touch when light failed. He slept for minutes at a time, waking to the sound of impacts and adjusting angles. Near dawn, he heard movement again. This time it was not panic. A small group approached cautiously, armor dulled and damaged, steps uneven. 2 male cadets supported a female between them, her exoshell torn open at the shoulder. They stopped when they saw him rise from the shelter, barked silhouette bristling with scars. "Is he human?" one male asked, voice uncertain. Ryan nodded. "He is," he said, then corrected immediately, aware of the slip even in exhaustion. "I am." The female winced as another gust rattled the stones. "Her armor failed," one male said. "She cannot keep pace." Ryan assessed quickly. The shoulder wound was deep but clean. Infection risk was rising with every minute exposed. He gestured them closer. "Sit her down," he said. "Shield her from the wind." He worked without ceremony, applying resin and oil, layering bark plates over the torn section, binding them to the remaining armor. The fit was imperfect, but it held. When he finished, the female rolled her shoulder experimentally and exhaled. "You learned this here," she said, disbelief threading her voice. "I learned it by watching," he replied. The group stayed with him for an hour, moving together through a particularly dense patch. The wind seemed to test them harder for it, as if offended by cooperation. When the route markers diverged, they parted without argument. No laughter followed his retreat. No insults chased his back. As the third day waned, Ryan felt the cumulative cost. Fatigue settled deep, heavy, and insistent. Every movement demanded intention. He adjusted his pace again, accepting slowness as survival. The planet did not care how quickly he finished. It cared only whether he adapted fast enough. At sunset, the storm slackened briefly. The thorns fell quiet, hanging motionless in the red light. Ryan stood on a rise and looked across the battered landscape. Armor lay scattered in broken pieces where cadets had shed weight to escape. Bark fragments from his own plates littered the ground behind him like a trail. He tightened his bindings one more time and moved on, scarred, slower, and still walking. Morning arrived thin and colorless, as if the sun itself hesitated to look at what the thorn season had done. Ryan woke stiff and slow, joints protesting as resin cracked microscopically along the seams of his armor. He did not rush to stand. He warmed his limbs first, flexing fingers, rolling shoulders, letting blood return to places that pain had claimed overnight. Endurance, he had learned, was not stubborn motion. Endurance was maintenance. He inspected himself with the same care he gave the armor. Cuts had closed unevenly, sealed dark by oil and dust. One puncture near his ribs throbbed with a warning heat. He cleaned it again, deeper this time, teeth clenched as he pressed resin into living tissue. Infection was an enemy that did not announce itself with noise or wind. It crept. He would not let it. The terrain ahead sloped upward toward higher stone shelves where the wind cut harder but carried fewer thorns. The route markers pulsed faintly on his slate, less insistent now, as if the system itself expected fewer survivors. He adjusted his load, discarding a cracked plate that no longer justified its weight, and reinforced his boots instead. Every decision traded protection in one place for vulnerability in another. He accepted the cost without resentment. By mid-morning, he saw movement ahead that did not belong to wind or vegetation. 3 cadets struggled across open ground, progress uneven and desperate. Their armor was damaged, plates missing or hanging loose. One male limped badly, every step a gamble. Another male supported him, shoulders hunched under shared weight. A female walked behind them, scanning constantly, weaponless and exhausted. They saw Ryan and stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. The bark armor marked him as something other than academy issue, something improvised and wrong. The resin-darkened skin caught light in a way that suggested hardness earned, not issued. The female broke the silence. "You are still moving," she said, disbelief sharper than accusation. "Yes," Ryan answered. The uninjured male swallowed. "He cannot keep this pace," he said, nodding toward the limping cadet. "His knee is failing. The joint lock shattered." Ryan studied the injury. Swelling distorted the armor's fit. Blood seeped with each step, thin and persistent. The cadet's jaw was set in pain that had passed shouting and settled into something colder. "If he keeps walking," Ryan said, "the joint will tear." Silence again. Wind hissed low over the ground, scattering loose spines that clicked harmlessly against stone. The injured cadet straightened as much as he could. "Leave him," he said, voice tight. "Finish the route." Ryan shook his head once. "Leaving him will not make the route shorter," he said. "It will only make it quieter." The female watched him closely. "You speak as if the planet listens." "It does," Ryan replied. "It listens for weakness and impatience." He knelt and began working without waiting for agreement. He dismantled the damaged joint piece by piece until only torn padding and exposed limb remained. He layered bark thickly around the knee, building a rigid brace that transferred weight upward and downward, away from the injury. Resin sealed the structure into a single unit. He reinforced it with fiber and adjusted tension until the cadet could stand without the joint collapsing. The cadet tested it carefully. Pain flickered across his face, but the limb held. "It will slow him," Ryan said, "but it will keep him intact." The uninjured male exhaled, relief breaking through exhaustion. "You should have had armor," he said quietly. Ryan looked at his barked forearm. "I do," he answered. They moved together for a time, not as a unit, but as proximity allowed. The wind strengthened again, driving heavier thorns at sharper angles. Ryan took point without discussion, angling his body to draw impacts away from exposed gaps. The bark plates shattered gradually, sacrificing themselves. He replaced what he could, accepted what he could not. Imitation began without instruction. The uninjured male tore a plate from fallen bark and lashed it clumsily to his own shoulder. The female smeared resin across a crack in her armor, grimacing at the smell but persisting. The injured cadet copied Ryan's pace, stopping often, adjusting often, refusing the instinct to push through pain blindly. Their progress was slow. The storm punished slowness less than haste. Thorn clusters that would have torn rushing bodies instead slid and glanced, frustrated. At a narrow pass between stone walls, the wind howled into a focused scream. Here the thorn season reached a different cruelty. Spines ricocheted endlessly, turning the space into a grinder. Ryan stopped short and studied the patterns, counting heartbeats between gusts, watching how debris lifted and fell. "We wait," he said. The uninjured male glanced at the darkening sky. "Waiting costs time. Rushing costs skin," Ryan replied. They waited. When the wind paused for 3 breaths, Ryan moved first, body low, bark angled. He crossed and flattened himself against the far wall. He signaled with a raised hand. One by one, the others followed, timing movement to silence rather than courage. The injured cadet nearly fell once, but Ryan caught him, bark plates grinding as a thorn shattered against his shoulder instead of flesh. On the other side, the female leaned against stone, breathing hard. She looked at Ryan with something like calculation. "You endure more pain than necessary," she said. Ryan wiped resin-stained sweat from his eyes. "Pain managed is cheaper than damage ignored," he said. As afternoon waned, the group thinned. One by one, cadets peeled away toward shelters marked on their slates, choosing safety over completion. No one mocked that choice. Thorn season had burned mockery out of them. When only Ryan and the injured cadet remained moving in the same direction, the cadet stopped. "You should go on," he said. "You are not injured like this." Ryan adjusted the brace one last time. "You are mobile," he said. "That is enough." The cadet studied him, then nodded. "He will make it," he said, not as hope, but as statement. They separated without ceremony. The climb toward the upper shelves punished endurance in subtler ways. The wind cut colder. Resin stiffened faster. Bark lost flexibility. Ryan adapted again, trimming plates thinner, trading blunt resistance for deflection. His hands moved automatically now, muscle memory built in days rather than years. By nightfall, fatigue pressed so deep it felt structural. His thoughts slowed. He forced himself to stop and shelter, not because he wanted rest, but because he recognized the danger of continuing without clarity. He built a low barricade and lay behind it, armor creaking softly as it cooled. Sleep came in fragments filled with soundless impact and remembered laughter. He woke often, checked wounds, resealed what threatened to open. Each time he lay back down, he chose to rest again, deliberately. When dawn broke, the thorn season shifted. The wind remained, but its edge dulled. The spines fell heavier, fewer, striking with force rather than quantity. Ryan rose slowly and looked ahead. The higher ground waited, scarred and exposed, but navigable. He stepped forward, scarred, stiff, and unbroken, moving not because pride demanded it, but because careful endurance had carried him this far and would carry him farther still. The 5th day began with a strange mercy. The wind still moved, but it no longer hunted with the same spiteful precision. It slid over the upper shelves and fell away into the lower flats like breath released after a long hold. Thorn clusters still drifted, but fewer lifted into the air, and the spines that did rise traveled in slower arcs, heavy enough to be seen and avoided. The planet had not softened. The season had simply reached its turning point. Ryan stood and took inventory without emotion. His bark armor had become a patchwork of replacements, darker where resin had soaked deep, lighter where fresh plates had been lashed in hours before. Oil and dust had formed a dull coat over exposed skin, making him look less like a cadet and more like a moving piece of the terrain. His hands were swollen at the knuckles, fingertips cracked where resin had hardened and broken repeatedly. The wound near his ribs no longer pulsed hot. It ached with a steady, honest pain, the kind that meant the body was repairing itself instead of losing ground. He ate slowly, forcing calories into a stomach that wanted rest more than fuel. He drank, then drank again, because dryness on Karis turned small mistakes into fatal ones. When he moved, He did not sprint into the morning as the Academy posters promised heroes did. He moved with practiced economy, letting each step land where the next could follow. The route slate pulsed a final sequence. The extraction marker sat on a ridgeline where the stone broke into a wide platform, visible from far below. He could see it now, a faint metallic glint against the pale rock, the beacon mast, half buried, waiting to confirm completion. Between him and that mast lay a shallow basin strewn with dead thorn growth and broken shells of seed pods. The basin looked deceptively calm, and that made him wary. He descended carefully, eyes on the ground, ears on the wind. The basin held an old hazard, not the flying thorns of full storm, but the dormant hooks that waited under dust. He probed with his cutting tool, turning over clumps, testing for spring-loaded spines. Twice he caught himself before stepping into a trap where thorns curved inward around a sinkhole of loose gravel. Halfway across, he found someone. A male cadet lay on his side near a cracked boulder, exoshell torn open, visor missing. The cadet's skin was ash-pale beneath bruises and dried blood. One arm twitched weakly, fingers clawing at dust as if trying to pull the ground closer. A thorn cluster had embedded in the cadet's hip, barbs holding fast. Ryan approached slowly and dropped into a crouch. The cadet's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Water," the cadet whispered. Ryan did not hesitate. He slid his water membrane from his pack and pressed the nozzle to the cadet's mouth, controlling the flow so the cadet would not choke. The cadet swallowed with difficulty, then drew a shaky breath that sounded like relief and regret mixed together. "Soft," the cadet rasped, a ghost of old contempt trying to rise out of habit. The word broke apart on his tongue. Human. Soft. Ryan watched the cadet's face and recognized him. The glossy black armor, the voice from the airlock, the whisper about screaming. The visor was gone now, and without it the cadet looked younger, smaller, more frightened than the Academy swagger had suggested. Ryan's anger stirred, but it had no room to grow. There was only a body failing in front of him, and time that would not return. "Do you want to stand?" Ryan asked. "Or do you want to live long enough to be found?" The cadet's eyes squeezed shut. "Live," he breathed. Ryan nodded once. He heated a stone with his fire start, shielding the flame from wind with bark plates. He softened the resin around the embedded thorns and eased them out, one by one, accepting the blood that followed. He cleaned the wound, packed it with antiseptic, then applied a thick layer of oil and resin to seal the torn tissue. He built a crude brace around the cadet's hip and thigh, using bark and fiber to stabilize the joint. When he finished, the cadet trembled with exhaustion. "Why?" he whispered again, the question smaller now, stripped of pride. Ryan tightened the last binding. "Because you would do nothing useful as a corpse," he said. The cadet swallowed, shame flickering across his face. "He would have laughed," the cadet murmured, as if trying to locate his old self. He thought armor made him better." Ryan looked at his own patchwork plates. "Armor makes impact easier," he said. "It does not make decisions." He helped the cadet sit up and guided him toward a shallow rock overhang, a place where wind and thorns would pass above rather than through. The cadet could not walk far, but he could crawl. Ryan placed the remaining water membrane within reach and positioned a bark plate like a small shield. "Stay here," Ryan said. "Signal when you hear rotors. Do not chase the beacon." The cadet's eyes met his. "You will finish," he said, voice steadier. It was not admiration. It was recognition. Ryan stood. Pain flared in his knees as he straightened, then settled again into background weight. He turned away and continued across the basin. The last climb took everything he had left. The stone shelves were steep and smooth, polished by constant abrasive wind. Thorns still traveled here, fewer but heavier, striking like thrown nails. One spine shattered a shoulder plate and punched into the bark beneath. He stopped, pulled it free, sealed the puncture, and replaced the plate with another thinner one. His fingers moved with a tired precision that felt almost detached, as if his body had learned the routine well enough to perform it without asking his mind for permission. He reached the ridge line near midday. The platform was wider than the slate had suggested, a natural terrace carved by erosion. The beacon mast stood in the center, bent slightly, its metal pitted by years of storms. Around it lay scattered evidence of earlier trials, fragments of exoshell plating, brittle cords, old warning flags reduced to shredded ribbons. The place did not celebrate completion. It recorded it. Ryan walked to the mast and placed his hand on the activation panel. The metal felt cold under resin-stained fingers. He pressed the control. A pulse of light ran up the mast. The beacon emitted a steady signal, bright and unambiguous. Completion confirmed. For a moment he simply stood there, looking out over Karis. From this height the Thorn Flats looked almost beautiful, a muted sea of pale growth and dark scars. The wind moved across it in slow waves, no longer screaming. The season was easing toward its end, leaving behind a landscape of punctures, broken shells, and stubborn life. He heard a faint hum and turned his head. An extraction craft crested the far ridge, stabilizers flaring as it approached. The sound was real, not imagined, and it carried the sharp comfort of machinery that obeyed physics instead of cruelty. The craft descended, landing with a controlled shudder. The ramp lowered. Instructor Vasca stepped out first, armored and immaculate, as if she had never tasted thorn dust in her lungs. A medical officer followed her, visor sealed. 2 recovery specialists carried a stretcher frame. Vasca's gaze swept the platform, taking in the scattered debris, the battered mast, then settling on him. Her eyes paused on the bark plates, on the resin-darkened skin, on the cuts sealed black by oil. "You arrived," she said. Her voice held no praise, only assessment. Ryan nodded. He did not bow. He did not smile. He stood with the quiet steadiness of someone who had stopped needing approval somewhere around the second day. Vasca stepped closer. "Where is your issued exoshell?" she asked. "I was not issued one," Ryan replied. "I am aware," she said. "Where is your Academy standard protection?" Ryan lifted his forearm slightly so she could see the layered bark. "This is my protection," he said. The medical officer moved around him, scanning with a handheld device. The officer's posture stiffened slightly when the readings came in, not with fear, but with surprise. "Multiple lacerations sealed," the officer said. "No systemic infection detected. Hydration marginal but stable. Dermal resilience improved." Vasca's crest angled. "Improved," she repeated. Ryan's voice remained even. "Oil and resin kept wounds closed," he said. "Bark plates took impacts. Maintenance kept small injuries from becoming fatal." "You sourced materials from the environment," Vasca said, as if testing a conclusion. "Yes," Ryan answered. "And you assisted others," she added, not asking. Ryan did not deny it. "A living cadet carries lessons back," he said. "A dead cadet carries only a report." Vasca looked past him at the horizon where the thorn haze still lingered. "The Academy designed this trial to expose human weakness," she said quietly. "Soft skin, low natural protection, high bleed risk." Ryan met her gaze. "Soft skin means sensation," he said. "Sensation means early warning. Early warning means adjustment." For the first time, Vasca's expression changed. It was not warmth. It was the smallest crack in certainty. "You claim weakness as advantage." "I used what I had," Ryan replied. "If the Academy wants cadets who survive, the Academy should stop confusing hardness with resilience." Silence stretched. Wind brushed the platform, gentle enough now to feel like weather instead of assault. The recovery specialists waited, hands still on the stretcher frame. Vasca turned slightly toward the medical officer. "Log his methods," she said. "Material selection, layering pattern, resin compounds, application frequency." The medical officer hesitated. For study, the officer asked. For instruction, Vasca said. The words landed heavier than any praise could have. Future cadets will be briefed. Human cadets will be issued equivalent supplies. Non-human cadets will be required to demonstrate environmental adaptation instead of relying solely on exoshell integrity. Ryan exhaled slowly. The tension he had carried for days loosened, not because the pain vanished, but because the meaning shifted. He had not only survived, he had forced the academy to notice the difference between mockery and measurement. As the medical officer guided him toward the ramp, Vasca spoke once more, her voice low enough to keep the platform from hearing it as an announcement. "Cadet Ryan," she said, "soft skin did not break you." Ryan paused at the foot of the ramp and looked back at the beacon mast, at the scattered debris, at the Thorn sea beyond. "Soft skin taught me," he said. He stepped into the craft. The ramp rose, sealing out thorn dust. Inside, the air was filtered and cool. The hum of engines replaced the hiss of spines. As the craft lifted, he saw the platform shrink beneath him, saw the basin where the cadet waited in shelter, saw the long trail of broken bark plates marking a path that had once been meant as a humiliation. When Karis fell away under cloud and haze, Ryan closed his eyes and let his body finally accept